Hey gang, you're probably wondering why there's an additional game coming out today. Well, that's because I've teamed up with the crew over at Card Trader to bring you an extra game for the next 4 weeks. That means every Friday you're going to get an additional gameplay, and today's the first one. But more about them at the end of the video. Today's game features 4 Canadian content creators who I've invited over to my house. I was super excited to organize this, and as you saw in yesterday's game, we've got a really great crew. Today's game features the Precons unchanged, but we switched it up a little bit with face commanders being played differently. In today's game, Commander Mechanic is playing Rendmaw, Proxy Lab playing Aminatou, Neo Royale is playing Zimone, and Davey B. Jones, who you may have seen streaming, is playing the Lord of Pain. Unfortunately, we were so excited to get this stream going and get playing, we didn't record opening hands, so we're going to jump straight into the gameplay. Davey draws, plays a tapped Temple of Malice, and scries 1. Proxy likes that so much he plays a tapped Temple of Silence and does the same. Chris doesn't want to break from the mold either, playing a tapped Temple of Malady for the hat trick, and scries 1. Thankfully Neo is a free spirit and just plays a Quandrix Campus, which comes in tapped and can scry. Davey just plays a Geothermal Bog for turn, which comes in tapped. Proxy's got a Swamp, and then pays 2 for a Mind Stone. Chris the Commander Mechanic has a Reliquary Tower for turn, and he also pays 2 for a Mana Rock with an Arcane Signet. Neo plays a Vine Glimmer Snarl, revealing a relevant basic land type so it comes in untapped, and he passes after that. Davey's turn 3 has her playing an Evolving Wilds, and she pays 2 for a Talisman of Indulgence. She ships the turn after that. Proxy's got a Tainted Isle, which can tap for both since he has a Swamp out, and he then pays enough for Aminatou. Chris plays a Tainted Wood, and then casts Talisman of Resilience. He then pays 2 more mana for another Mana Dork with a Deathcap Cultivator, and passes to Neo. Neo's got a Forest for turn, and he pays 3 for a Trigon Predator, which we'd seen used to good use in the first Precon game. He then passes, and during his end step, Davey sacrifices the Evolving Wilds to find a tapped basic swamp. Davey's got an Exotic Orchard for her turn, and she then casts her commander, the Lord of Pain, and ships the turn to Proxy. Proxy surveils 2, putting one to the graveyard and the other on top, and he then draws it for turn. In his main phase, he then casts an Azorius Signet, and this gets Davey a Lord of Pain trigger, pinging Chris for 2. Proxy then plays an Arcane Sanctum which comes in tapped, and he goes to combat. He swings his commander at the Commander Mechanic for 2 with Aminatou. His second main phase then has him casting a Diabolic Vision, which helps him set up his next few turns by rearranging his top 5. Chris the Commander Mechanic taps 5 mana to cast Rendmaw, who as it comes in, gives everyone a tapped Goated Bird token. This has the Lord of Pain triggering, and Proxy takes 5. Chris then plays the Vault of Whispers, which meets Rendmaw's criteria of 2 types being played, and the table makes another bird token. The Commander Mechanic then follows up with a Scavenging Ooze, and passes turn. Neo plays a Forest for turn, and he goes to combat. He swings the Trigon Predator at Proxy, and the birds go at Davey. Both of them take their hits, and Neo blows up the Mind Stone with the Predator trigger. He then taps enough for Zimone, and Davey gets a Lord of Pain trigger, dealing 4 to the Commander Mechanic, and Neo then passes turn. Davey's turn has her drawing and playing a Tainted Peak, and she pays 4 mana for a Torture Pit. We're in danger.
Y'all are in danger. You're trapped in here with me.
She then blasts Neo for 4 with the Lord of the Pain trigger, and the enchantment then resolves. 2 more mana then gets her a Seance board, and she goes to combat. She swings a bird at Proxy and a bird at Neo, and after they connect, she passes turn. Proxy surveils 2, keeping 1 on top, and bins the other. He then, surprise, miracles a monologue tax for only 1 white. This triggers the Lord of the Pain, dealing 3 damage plus 2 from the room to Chris the Commander Mechanic. Proxy then pays enough for a Mesa Enchantress and goes to combat. he swings both of his birds at Davy, who can't block, and he passes turn. The commander mechanic untaps and draws, and he plays a forest for turn, and then pays 2 for grapple with the past. This has Davy dealing 2+2 from the room and the Lord of Pain to Neo Royale. Chris reveals and keeps a Stitcher supplier from among them, and then puts the rest into his graveyard. He then plays the supplier, milling 3 more cards. This being his second spell for the turn has Proxy making a treasure. Chris then casts an Ursine Monstrosity, and he goes to combat. This has him milling a card from the Monstrosity, which is a Dryad Arbor. He then swings both of his bird tokens at Davy, dealing 4. Neo draws and plays a Temple of the False God on curve, which triggers Zimone, and he manifests Dread. He puts one of the top 2 face down, and the other into his graveyard. He then casts the adventure side of Beanstalk Giant, Fertile Footsteps, to go and find a basic to the field untapped. This has Davy getting her Lord trigger, dealing 3+2 from the room to Proxy. With the land from the adventure coming in, it triggers Zimone again, and Neo is able to turn face up Arithmethes, which seems very good. Going to combat, he swings his flyers at Davy for 6. With the Predator connecting, he blows up Davy's room. In Neo's second main phase, he plays a Yavimaya Elder and then passes turn. Davy draws and casts a Mask of Grizzlebrand, dealing 3 to Neo for blowing up her room. She then gears up the Lord of Pain with the mask, and it now has Flying, Lifelink, and Menace, not to mention shuts off life gain from her opponents. We then realize Proxy should have a treasure for monologue tax for Neo's turn, so we add it. Going to combat, one good turn deserves another, so Davy swings her birds at Neo, and they connect, and she passes. Proxy surveils his 2, binning both, and then draws her turn. He then hard casts a Sigil of the Empty Throne, getting a draw trigger from the Mesa Enchantress. The Lord of Pain triggers as well, dealing 5 to Neo, and Davy gains 5 life. Proxy has to attack with his birds, and now with a flying lifelinking blocker, Davy isn't such a great target, so the birds go at Neo for 4. He then passes turn. During his end step, Chris uses his Ooze to eat Titania and give it a +1/+1 counter. Chris the Commander mechanic casts a Whisper Silk Cloak, which has Proxy taking 3 and Davy gaining 3 from the Lord of Pain trigger. He then gears it up onto the Monstrosity and goes to combat. This has Chris milling a card with the Monstrosity and then randomly rolls to choose an opponent, hitting Davy. He then commits the team, swinging everything he can at Davy. Davy blocks 1 bird, gaining 5 life, but still takes the rest. In his second main phase, Chris then moves the cloak onto Rendmaw, and during his end step, Davy gets to add a counter to her Seance board. Neo draws for turn, and casts a Shriekwood Devourer, which once again triggers the Lord, and Davy deals 7 to Chris the Commander mechanic, and gains 7. Going to combat, Neo swings Arithmethes, the birds, and the Yavimaya Elder at Davy, and the Trigod Predator goes at Chris. With the attackers declared, the Shriekwood lets Neo untap up to 12 lands, which is more than he has, and he decides not to help out his opponents by untapping their extras. Davy then moves to blocks, blocking one of the birds with her commander and gaining 5, but still takes a massive hit. And Neo also gets a Predator trigger, blowing up Chris's Talisman of Resilience. In his second main phase, Neo then casts Disorienting Choice, picking the Helm of Grizzlebrand, the Sigil, and the Arcane Signet. Davy and Proxy keep theirs, while Chris exiles his card. This lets Neo go and find 2 lands of his choice, and he puts out a Mosswarp Bridge and a Myriad Landscape, getting 2 triggers from Zimone. He manifests Dread from the first one, binning a card and putting 1 face down as a 2/2. He then decides to resolve the Hideaway, tucking away one of the top 4. He then resolves the second Zimone trigger and turns the card face up, and it's Tetyova. Neo then plays a land for turn and draws a card. I do forget at this point he can't gain life, adding 1 to his life total, and he passes after that. Davy plays a Graven Cairns for turn, and she then casts Sir Conrad the Grim. This gets her a Lord of Pain trigger, which Proxy responds to by casting Brainstorm. This gets Davy another trigger, and she deals 1 to Chris and gains 1, and Proxy then resolves a Brainstorm, which doesn't miracle to anything. Davy then deals 5 to Proxy and gains 5 life. Going to combat, she swings a bird at Proxy and 1 at Neo, who both just take the hit. She passes after that. Proxy surveils 2 and then draws her turn, paying the miracle cost for the Eldest Reborn, which has the Lord of Pain triggering and dealing 5 to Chris, with Davy gaining 5. Proxy's opponents then each sacrifice a creature, triggering Sir Conrad 3 times, and dealing 3 more to Davy's opponents. Chris also mills 3 because of Stitcher's Supplier dying, one of which is a Carrion Grub, and this triggers Sir Conrad again, dealing another 1 to her opponents. Proxy does also get to make an Angel token from casting an enchantment, and draws a card from the Mesa Enchantress. He then plays a Swamp for turn, and goes to combat. He then swings the birds at Neo again because he doesn't want to give Davy any life, and Neo drops to 5. Proxy then passes, and during his end step, Neo cracks the Elder, which has Sir Conrad dealing another 1 to Davy's opponents. Chris the Commander Mechanic draws, and casts a Formless Genesis, which has Proxy taking 3 and Davy gaining 3, while Chris makes an Ooze token, and the table all gain another Goated Bird because the spell has 2 types. Chris then pays to move the cloak over onto the Monstrosity again, and he goes to combat. He mills 1, and once more luck shines on him, as he hits Davy with a random choice, and he swings the Monstrosity at her, which is now pumped to an 8/8. He also has to swing a bird at Neo. They both take their hits, and Chris then passes turn. Neo untaps and draws. He pays enough mana to cast They Came from the Pipes, and Davy deals 5 to Proxy and gains 5. He then manifests Dread twice, and draws 2 cards as they come in. He then plays his land for turn, and gets a Zimone trigger. This has him manifesting Dread yet again, and he draws again, plus draws a card from Tatyova because of landfall. Neo then activates Mosswarp Bridge, which allows him to cast a Worldspine Worm, and he then moves to combat. He swings out at Davy, untapping all of his lands from the on-attack trigger of the Shriekwood. Before moving to blocks, Davy casts a Chaos Warp and targets Arithmethes. This has Neo shuffling it in and hitting a land, which goes to the field. He gets a Zimone trigger and turns face up a Scab Ruinator. Moving to blocks, Davy puts the Lord of Pain in front of the Predator, and she takes the rest, which is a total of 10, and a creature dies, which has her dealing 1 thanks to Sir Conrad. In his second main phase, Neo then casts Multani and passes. Davy draws her turn and goes to combat. She swings a bird at Proxy and a bird at Neo, and the menacing Lord of Pain at Chris. This is pretty much game, as Chris can't block the commander, and Neo and Proxy have to block in order to survive. If they do though, Sir Conrad will kill them with the triggers, and Chris as well, and Davy locks the game up through combat. Before we get into the game review, I just want to thank Card Trader for their sponsorship of this video. Card Trader is a massive marketplace with thousands of cards from hundreds of different sellers worldwide, and you can always find what you're looking for, or find something new. There's great support, as well as the Zero system, which is basically a PO box for your cards. They'll store them safely and combine shipping for international orders, so you can save on pesky fees. If you act now, you can use my code to sign up, and use the promo code MTGMudsta to save 5% off your first order. Game review time. This one was just over an hour once things got going. There was a bit of a sound hiccup at the beginning of the stream, which we quickly corrected, but it was about an hour and 5 minutes, all things said and done. It was super fun. I think the decks all got to do some kind of cool stuff, although once again I felt the Aminatou deck just kind of struggled a little bit. Surveil is great, Miracle is great. I think the ability is very, very powerful to reduce the cost of enchantments. I think what it needs though for tweaking, or at least when you upgrade it to more than just the Precon, is more reliable ways to manipulate the top of your deck and draw on other people's turns. This means you could potentially hit like 4 enchantments in a turn cycle, which would be a lot better. Rendmaw I was really impressed with. It seemed like there was a lot of aggressiveness, and giving those birds is just really, really cool. Chris managed to hit quite a few card types, and we were able to get a couple birds going, which is pretty sweet to see. Zimone, I think it's probably the strongest out of the 4, although the Lord of Pain was pretty good, but Zimone just seems so consistent. The top deck manipulation with Manifest Dread is good, being able to cheat out creatures and then flip them face up for no cost is wild. There's just a lot of really good support cards in the deck, and it does really, really well. What also does really well is slapping any form of lifelink onto the Lord of Pain. This means that the later the game goes, the bigger the spells get, the more people are getting blasted, and the more life that player is gaining. You get into this kind of false sense of security I find with the Lord of Pain, where when you're casting spells on your turn, you're often like, well, I'm not too worried, someone else is going to get blasted. But it speeds up the game so much. People were taking like between 4 and 7, and it was just really ticking down life totals. Couple that with the fact that Sir Conrad just sitting on the board made combat super difficult because any kind of blocks would just be potentially lethal. And yeah, Davey had a great board state and played it super well. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.